We go till 4:30, so we want to fill all our time. Welcome to Trash Talk 2. Who was here for the first one, just by a show of hands? Okay, good, good. We have new people. This is good. My name is Zach. I'm the city's sustainability manager. I've been on the job for about a month now. Before that, I worked for the city as an intern since February. And then we have Stephanie over here. She's the community engagement manager. And then we have Dina, who is from Waste Management, who will be speaking to you shortly after me. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome. So yeah, with that, let's get started. We are going to talk about what has changed since the last Trash Talk we gave back in, what was it, March or April, I think? April? Yeah, March 29th, there you go. Thank you. We have Waste Management here today to talk to us as well, which is really cool because they're the ones that operate this county's recycling facility where our goods go. Even though we have Waste Pro as our contractor, it all goes to Waste Management's facility. So with that, click away. Okay, so we're going to go over, I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, try and keep it to 10 minutes, and then Dina will take over. Just to quickly go over the problem again, what's going on, what's happening with China, the impact of that, what the city has been doing in response, and just a general close up with the 4 R's. I know you're probably familiar with the 3 R's term, but we're going to add a 4th R. Okay, so the problem, the world has accumulated 8.3 billion tons of plastic waste since the 1950s, which is an enormous amount of waste. 9% of that roughly has been recycled, 12% has been incinerated, and 79% is in landfills or in the general environment, mostly in the oceans. 34 billion tons are expected to be produced by the year 2050 if nothing changes. And then that could equate to, by the same year, there could be more plastic in the ocean by weight than fish, which is an unbelievable metric. And 1 million plastic bottles are bought around the world every minute, just to put some perspective about how much plastic we're using all of the time. Next, please. So where does the U.S. fit into this? The current national U.S. recycling rate in the U.S. is about 35%. The U.S. is one of the worst industrialized nations for managing its trash when compared to other nations. To give you an example of someone that's doing good is Germany. They have a 68% recycling rate. But even that, when you really think about it, could be better if you're looking for a pure circular economy. You can see in this graph here, which came from the Versick Maplecroft Association, which is a global risk analysis group, which actually just published this study between now and the last Trash Talk we had, where it shows that the U.S. represents only 4% of the world's population. We have, 315 million people, but we produce 12% of the world's waste, which is the worst when it comes to any industrialized nation on the planet. Just to give you perspective, the average Chinese citizen produces 3% less than that. And an Ethiopian citizen will do 7% that. So we're not doing so hot. Go back one sec. The average American, I also want to just point this out, produces 1,700 pounds of waste annually, which is incredible. And good to go on that. So a lot has changed in the recycling industry as of late, and I'm sure Dina will attest to this when she presents. And most of this has come in response to what's happened with China. In 2017, they announced that they would begin the National Sword Operation, which basically instituted a 0.5% contamination rate on all imported recyclable goods, which is where most of our goods went. Since 1992, 45% of the world's recyclables went to China. If you include Hong Kong in this metric, it goes up to something like 75%, which is equivalent to 106 million metric tons of stuff. And the 0.5 contamination rate basically meaning, it has to be 99.5% pure with non-contaminated goods to be accepted. Otherwise, it'll be turned around or just won't be taken or be taken to a landfill. So since the last Trash Talk, other countries have gotten on board with this in Southeast Asia, where we sent most of our stuff. And now we have countries like Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia all saying that they will no longer accept Western recyclable goods. Next, please. Which puts a big dent in what we have to do here. This green square that is highlighted by the orange square represents everything that was being sent to China. And now that gateway is no longer there. So what do you do with all of that stuff? It has flooded the market with goods, and basic economics, you have a lot of something, the price drops, values go to nothing. A good example of that is glass. We'll talk about that a little bit too. And because of this, by 2030, 111 million metric tons of plastic will have been displaced due to the policy change if nothing changes on our end or across the globe, because we are not alone in this crisis. Next, please. I just took some headlines from the last few weeks. They seem to be growing in frequency. Canada has to haul back trash that they sent to the Philippines years ago. Next, Stephanie. Indonesia is sending stuff back to Australia. Next, please. And then Malaysia to send 100 tons of plastic waste back to Australia as well. And you can see behind these individuals an example of an imported recyclable shipping container that's just full of what looks like plastic bottles that are crushed. So, yeah. In response to this, we in the city of Cape Canaveral have changed some of our recycling guides to better meet current market demands and to make the most out of what we can still recycle and to do it with as little contamination as possible. Next, please, Stephanie. One more. So we have instituted, as we said we would do in the last Trash Talk, new signage across the city at the most publicly accessible locations. Public library, we've got one at City Hall, which is right outside there. And then we have a traveling one that's a picture from the Core Surf competition that happened last Friday that I was at. We'll probably put one at another location, maybe at the school. We have one at the Cape View Center. And it has this on it, as you can see. Next, please. So we have new signage on all of our facility bins that we find in our offices. We also recently just printed these, which are lid stickers that we'll be putting on with the help of WastePro, which are really nice. They're just smaller versions of that. This actually came at the suggestion of the residents from Puerto del Rio condominium complex, which is very nice to get their involvement. So thank you to them. And then we also have magnets, fridge magnets, if you'd like. We could take those. This one highlighting why you should not put plastic bags in your recycling bins at home, because plastic bags do a lot of damage. And Dina will speak about that a lot. Just to review too the signage itself, we are now calling or advising residents that they should be focusing on recycling clean and empty aluminum cans and steel cans. You can also put those in there as well. Empty and clean plastic bottles, newspaper, office paper. You can throw in junk mail, magazines in that. And then flattened cardboard that is not soiled or wet. Same goes for the paper. Make sure it's not wet. These items were chosen because these are the ones that still have the most value on the market. They have a place to go, and they're easy to remember. A lot of recycling lists that I've seen across the world, they have like 20 bullets of stuff, and nobody can remember that. And these items are just really, I think, easy to remember and a quick shot, and you can remember what's going on. Some of the other things we've been doing, we quite often post on social media about this. Some of the stuff that you've seen out in the lobby, we've turned into digital format, so we post that. We put it in our weekly update, the Canaveral Explorer. We have articles about that. We have community outreach sessions like this one. We're going to be instituting a new sustainability-based outreach program called Sustain What, which I actually have one of the first flyers for right here. I will pass it around later, where Trash Talk 3 will be coming up. We have reusable water bottle and bag giveaways. We're going to be ordering more of those. We are a part of the Litter Quitter program through Keep Brevard Beautiful. Some of our restaurants are a part of that, which is really cool. That basically means that they are using alternatives to plastics. We're promoting homegrown recycling businesses, and I just want to show everybody this real quick. What I mean by this is because of our outreach and what we've done with our signage, we actually had a company that moved from Ohio that's a recycling business, and they take goods, mostly plastic, and they turn it into usable items like this. This is a roof shingle made from what used to be plastic bottles. Pretty cool, huh? This particular company is called Alpha Omega, and they are looking to set up shop right here in the city, which I think would be fantastic because it could offer another drop-off point for our residents to take goods. They take some things that aren't really marketable right now, glass being one of them, and they turn it into stuff like this and also garden beds. So hopefully they can set up shop here and find a home in our beautiful city. Attracting those green businesses is, I think, a really good idea. And then we are the cream of the crop. We are actively researching the logistics and scope of a single-use plastics ban. A lot of cities and municipalities and counties even have done this. I want to reiterate, though, that we are in the very, very early stages of this. I've reached out to the City of Orlando to see what they have done, because there's a lot of stuff to be worked out. We don't want to have this ban be unfair. We want to make sure it can be even, what's the word I'm looking for? Implemented, yeah, there we go. And you have to take things into account like medical needs and stuff like that for certain individuals. So we really want to make sure it's responsible and we do the right thing. But a lot of cities have been doing it. West Palm Beach, I believe, just did it. So that's something on our radar for sure. Because in the end all for this, a lot of what's going to help is just not using this stuff at all. Reducing our plastic usage and stuff like that. And then the Kairos Community Garden over here on A1A. We do composting there, and in the future we're also looking into implementing a composting program for city residents where they can have a bin from the city, a little tub, and use it as a composting site for their own family. Orlando does this, so hopefully we could do something with that. So real quick before I close, the first bullet there, refuse. That is the fourth R that I'd like everybody to remember in their mind. Because we're really used to hearing reduce, reuse, recycle, but we have to refuse in the first place to kind of get ourselves out of this waste crisis that we're in. Just don't use the plastic bottles. Use alternatives like metal straws, wooden utensils instead of plastic ones, biodegradable Tupperware and stuff like that. Even metal Yetis like this. I really love mine. It's brand new. I got it for my birthday. Never leaves my side. But we still want you guys to recycle in the first place too. So that's why we're here to learn. And then the last slide I have is wastedive.com. I want everybody to write this website down or remember it or take a picture of it. This is a very good website that tells you what's going on around the country in terms of the waste crisis, and goes actually state by state and will show you what is happening with each state's respective recycling programs. Florida, Alabama, California, all of them, the good and the bad. So that's something to definitely, I think you should check out. I get a lot of my information from this particular website. I don't think you'll want to go anywhere else besides this for research, except for our own website. You should go to that one too. I think that's pretty much it. I don't want to take any more time from Dina. This is my contact information. The other thing that has changed since the last Trash Talk is I now have business cards. So if anybody would like that, I'll leave them at the front of the room. But with that, we'll take questions at the end, by the way. I know some people probably have questions. Dina, you want to?
Thank you. Good job. Showing properly on the screen and appears to be good. All right, good afternoon, everyone. As Zach mentioned earlier, my name is Dina Ryder-Hicks. I'm the Public Affairs Manager with Waste Management. Thank you very much for having me here today. So we're going to talk about recycling. Zach touched on some of this, but as many of us may have seen in news reports or what have you, the recycling world really is changing. And by changing, I mean dramatically from where it was even as recently as 2 years ago. So talking about some of the things with regard to single stream recycling, which is mostly what we see happening now. If you look back to the 1970s, 1960s, a lot of areas had separation of recyclables. You had one bin for plastics, one for newspaper, one for metal materials, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how it was for a number of years. Waste Management is the largest residential recycler in the country. This was something that the company with some other companies started, really back in the 1960s, mostly on the West Coast, and eventually evolved into other states, obviously throughout the country and all throughout North America. Now, somewhere in the 1970s and 1980s, the thought process started to turn to single-stream recycling, with the idea that if you make it simpler for people to recycle, they're more likely to do it, and you're more likely to get more volume. So that was where the idea of this commingled single-stream recycling happened. There are pros and cons of dual stream or tri-stream or single stream recycling, of looking at either one. Obviously, with one cart where you can throw everything in one cart, you can recycle more materials. With that, however, though, that also leads to a lot of undesirable materials or non-recyclable materials actually going into that cart. So there are pros and cons of each. Now, some of the confusion really started to lie as you look in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, is that recycling, what was acceptable in one area may not necessarily be acceptable in other areas. And it's all driven by markets, it's all driven by availability of equipment and resources to be able to effectively process. So through the years, that sort of led to a lot of confusion among the residents about what can I put in here and what should go where. So as a result of that, we sort of pared it down, and we started to really take a look at what makes something recyclable. Now, a key thing to remember here, and some people are sometimes surprised when I say this, is that recycling is a business. It always has been. It always has been a business. And in order for a business to be profitable, you obviously have to have a product that has a demand and that someone is willing to pay for that product. And, as a result, that drives a lot of the market conditions of what is and isn't acceptable in single-stream recycling programs. So if there is a market demand for a particular product and a processor, whether it be Waste Management or any of the other processors throughout the world, there has to be a profitability factor to it. The environmental benefits, I think, of recycling have been well documented. So I think a lot of people understand that. But with regard to recycling itself, in order for anyone to be able to do it, because there is a cost to processing the recyclables, it's very important to make sure that you have an end user, a market, someone that is willing to pay for this particular product. So the first part of recycling, of course, is collection. In this case, we're talking about single stream. Then processing. That's when it goes to what's known as a material recovery facility, or a MRF, which is a fancy way of saying a recycling processing center. There, depending on the type of equipment and the type of MRF that's there, there's a lot of high-tech equipment involved that is separating each of the materials by commodity. You also have the human factor there, too, to be able to take out anything that is not recyclable that is coming across those conveyor belts. And then, of course, the end market. What is the demand for this particular product? What is the volume that the customers are looking for? And what is the value? Is there a value in actually trying to recycle this particular product? Is there an end user that wants this product? So what happens at a MRF? Well, our Waste Management MRF here in Cocoa and all of them across the country, pretty much the same thing. The truck originally comes in, crosses the scale, so we know how much material is in that truck. The materials are then sorted by commodity. We use optical scanners that actually sort each of the material by what it is. The optical scanner reads the material, it knows what it is, and it knows which line to put it on. So as it comes through there, it knows that it's going to the correct line, be it plastic, be it a specific type of plastic, whether it's PET or HDPE or another different type of plastic, whether it's paper, mixed paper, cardboard, et cetera, and on down the line. The commodities are then baled. And as we'll touch on a little bit, as Zach touched on earlier too, the bales must meet specific quality standards. And then, of course, there's a buyer for these products. The commodities are then shipped to these particular buyers. Recycling contamination. This has been very much a hot topic phrase in our industry, and Platt can attest to this as well. This is something that we're dealing with as an industry. This is not just a waste management problem. It's not a Waste Pro problem. It is an industry problem that every single one of us is dealing with. So we have to address and find ways to educate our consumers about what contamination is and how to avoid it. And the number one question that we're asked is, why should I care? And we're going to touch on that. So contamination is basically trash or non-recyclables that end up getting mixed in with the single stream recycling cart or bale of material that's there. Average contamination rate right now is running about 30%. Here in Brevard, we run anywhere from 25% to 35% contamination. It is very high. And so that means about a third of the material, sometimes more, that is coming into our facility ends up going to the landfill. And the biggest challenge with it is some of that material that is going to the landfill might otherwise have been a valuable recyclable. And the number one item that contaminates otherwise valuable recyclables is food. If we get a mayonnaise jar and that mayonnaise jar opens and there's mayonnaise left in there and that mayonnaise gets smeared across that cardboard is now no longer valuable. That end user can't use that cardboard anymore. That cardboard, which otherwise might have been valuable, now ends up going to the landfill. Zach touched on China as well. China is not purchasing any recyclables if it's anything more than 0.5% contamination. India has followed suit, other European markets have followed suit, and North American markets have also followed suit. Now, the good news is for us here locally is at our facility here in Cocoa, our MRF here in Cocoa, none of the materials that are coming out of there are going to China any longer. Except for a couple of bales of mixed paper that go to India every now and then, all of the materials that are coming out of our Cocoa MRF are staying here in North America. So that is good news, but the bad news is these end users are also demanding 0.5% contamination levels. So the thought process is, and we understand it, again, keeping in mind that recycling is a business, if someone else is getting that high quality product, domestic markets are saying the same thing. We want that high quality product too, because it's going to keep our costs lower in the long run. Now for us as an industry, what it does is it raises our costs, and that's why progressive cities like Cape Canaveral and some others are doing the right thing by putting messaging out and education out so that we can try and keep those processing costs low. Because as this last bullet says, the increased costs of recycling because of increased costs in processing and transporting and moving these materials and finding buyers and end users for these products is really the challenge. And again, going back to that question I asked earlier, of the number one question that I'm asked is, why should I care? Because if those processing costs continue to climb, eventually those costs are going to be passed on to all of us. I mean, all of us. I live here too, so I'm going to be paying more for recycling as well. And we're really, as an industry, trying to avoid that right now. So educational campaigns like this are so very valuable. Now, some communities across the country have the ability that is within the confines of their code to actually fine residents. Some will actually fine residents. Some have mandatory recycling, and they'll fine residents if they're not participating in recycling. Some now have taken it a step further that if they are recycling but they're throwing raw garbage or non-recyclables into their single stream cart, they can be fined as well. So we're not quite here yet to that here in Florida, but some other communities across the country have started implementing these measures, again with the idea to try and keep the costs for everyone low. Wish cycling. We have a lot of wish cyclers here in Brevard and throughout the country. Wish cycling, unfortunately, does not do anyone any good. Wish cyclers are those folks who have an item and want it to be recycled, or they think it should be recycled, so they put it into their cart. And what it does is it's an item that's not recyclable. There's no market for it. One of those items that I can speak to is say things like garden hoses. People look at it and say, well, it's rubber, it's plastic, it's got metal components on it, it should be recyclable. There's absolutely no market, no end user that wants to buy a bale of garden hoses to try and recycle them. In those instances, it's a lot more cost effective for the manufacturer to buy the raw materials to make the new garden hose than it would be for them to try and decompose the garden hose to try and make something new out of it. So unfortunately, wish cycling really does not do anyone any good. And there are, as you can see, there's a book on this as well, probably several of them that have been published by now, is the dangers of wish cycling and why this is not necessarily doing anyone any favors. Contamination. In most of our areas across the country, the number one problem in single stream materials, in single stream programs, is plastic bags. And I will show you pictures of what plastic bags do at single stream MRFs. Whether it's Waste Management or anybody else that's got a single stream MRF, they get wrapped up in the equipment. And we actually literally have to shut down the line, and a couple of our workers literally climb onto the belts to cut the plastic bags out of our machinery. And of course, all of that comes with a cost. Once that line is shut down, we're now not making money on that, and now we're taking time away from processing recyclables to cut plastic bags out. Places like Publix and Kohl's and Target and Walmart and all of those types of places, that's where plastic bags should go. They have receptacles out front. I've been to most of the Publix around the area, and they generally have receptacles out front. They send them to places in other parts of the country that they do a couple of things with. They either turn them into other plastic bags, or they sell them to another end user who makes something new out of it. So that's where plastic bags should go. Big, heavy items. I'm not kidding when you see this. Councilwoman Raymond, Stephanie, Zach, they have all seen it. They saw virtually every one of these things when they toured our Coco MRF a couple of months ago. And we get car parts, we get all sorts of things. Diapers, why people think dirty diapers are recyclable is beyond me, but we get all sorts of things. And what that does is, as you might imagine, any big heavy items like a manifold or something coming across the conveyor belt could break that machinery. Liquid and food, this is what we were talking about earlier with regard to the mayonnaise that gets smeared across the cardboard. These are the top three pieces that we see here in Brevard County of what our contamination is, and really across the country. Plastic bags are a huge issue across the country. Here are some pictures of what plastic bags do at our MRF. So these are workers that are literally climbing onto one of the sorting lines. These are one of the initial sorting lines that start to sort some of the commodities, and there's plastic bags wrapped all around here. They literally have to go in and cut those out. These are some of the non-recyclables that we've seen recently coming through some of our lines. A lot of plastic film, plastic bags, assorted PVC piping and different things like that, things that aren't recyclable. The one at the top, I'm not quite sure what that is. It might have been skis or something like that. It looks like a body bag there. I'm not quite sure what that is, but those are the types of things, too, that we end up seeing. And this one is always very surprising. Yes, these were literally taken from our MRF. Ammunition, grenades. We've gotten grenades. We've gotten loaded weapons. We've gotten weight sets. We've gotten all these things. Of course, our first call when any of these come through is to the Brevard County Sheriff's Office, of course, but this is an example of some of the things. The sword there is really surprising as well. But these are some things that end up, and why folks think they're recyclable is beyond me. Here's some of the additional details about China. Now, in 2013, China enacted Operation Green Fence. This is where they started to reduce the amount of acceptable contamination they would allow. For years, honestly, for lack of a better word, China became the world's garbage dump. Any bales of material that was not wanted anywhere throughout North America or Europe was ended up going to China. Eventually, their equivalent of the Secretary of the Interior stepped in and said, look, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the capabilities to handle all of this garbage that's coming into our country. We really need to put a stop to this. So they did. They really enacted some stringent guidelines starting in 2013. In 2018, they took it a step further, a very significant step further. And in March, April of 2018, that's when they announced that they would only accept 0.5% contamination. Other countries immediately picked up on that and said, we're going to do the same thing. So every load is inspected. We've actually had inspectors from China initially come here to our MRF with moisture meters to detect the amount of moisture that's in some of our bales of material. If the moisture level was too high, they were rejecting it. So it's very, very significant of what it's done in the industry. And as you can imagine, any such restrictions like this send the commodities markets into a tailspin. They have been amazingly volatile over the past 18 months. So much so that about a year ago this time, and it still hasn't rebounded considerably, but mixed paper was trading at negative $15 a ton. So basically, we were all paying someone to take mixed paper for us. Right now, the most valuable commodity is aluminum cans. And all the aluminum cans that come out of our MRF here stay here domestically in North America. Aluminum cans are still great. Cardboard continues to fluctuate up and down. Mixed paper is still very, very low. Some of the other items as well. Again, it depends on the moisture level that is in some of those types of loads. Different types of plastics. The challenge with different types of plastics and the commodities market is as long as the price of petroleum remains low, it's less expensive for the manufacturers to purchase raw products than it is to go through all of the processing and what have you that it takes to recycle it. When gas was $4 a gallon and petroleum was, barrels of petroleum were way high, the value of plastics was very high. But now with those prices still remaining relatively low, it's a real challenge for trying to have the plastics market rebound. So this is always a fun one. We like to do this when we go to schools and talk to the kids. Which of these are recyclable? The answer is none of these items are recyclable in your single stream cart. You should not be putting any of these things into your single stream cart. The reason being, some of the ones that surprise most people is the strawberry container, the first one there, that you get the strawberries or fruit in at Publix. Reason being, that's a very hard to recycle plastic and it's very brittle. By the time it gets through the processing line, any processing line, it's been crushed and it falls apart. It's very brittle. The pieces are so small, the end user cannot do anything with it. Sometimes they make it through. So we encourage people, yes, if you have a larger one, put it through because sometimes it will make it through because there will be an end user for that product if it remains intact. But the really small ones that the blueberries and things come in, those generally are crushed and are too small by the time they get to the end line that they can never be baled. The pizza box, that's always a big one. What about the pizza box? Here's what we tell people with the pizza box. If there's cheese and oil and pepperoni and green peppers and whatever else stuck to the bottom of that pizza box, the end user does not want that. They can't use it. They can't do anything with it. But usually the top of the pizza box is oil-free and cheese-free. So at that point, some people will actually rip off the top of the pizza box, put that in your recycling cart, and the part that has the food in it, put that into the regular garbage. Shredded paper. Yes, shredded paper is recyclable if you go to something like Iron Mountain or Progressive or one of those types of places that do the document destruction. That's where those materials should go, not into your single stream cart. Because as it goes through a MRF, what happens is that paper becomes so small that it falls down through the conveyor belts and it looks like snow. And it's not recyclable, it does not end up being baled. So Christmas lights, I think we talked about some of those things. Those are known in our industry as tanglers. They get tangled up in all of the equipment. We have to shut down the line again as well and put those in. And styrofoam. Styrofoam has all sorts of chemical compounds in it that make it not recyclable. So if a processor tries to do something with trying to recycle styrofoam, because there was a belief for a while that you could recycle styrofoam, but now it's to the point where scientists and engineers have really looked into it and have realized that the processing required to transform styrofoam into new styrofoam releases too many dangerous chemicals, and it's putting their people at risk. So that's why styrofoam is not something that should be recycled. These are the things that are good recyclables. And this is going back to the basics. Plastic bottles, plastic tubs, detergent bottles, aluminum cans, metal cans, cans of vegetables, those types of things, and fruit, those are terrific. Paper, including junk mail, envelopes, even with the little plastic sleeve in it, that's perfectly fine, and cereal boxes and pasta boxes and those types of things. If you just remember those basic materials, you're doing it right. provided that they are cleaned out and rinsed out. Now, one of the criticisms that we sometimes hear in the industry is, well, you're asking me to clean this out with water that I pay for. If I have to put, a quarter cup of mayonnaise in here, well, I'm paying for that quarter cup of water. So now I'm paying more for that. We don't care if you're rinsing out the mayonnaise jar in the retention pond behind your house, or if you're going down to the ocean and rinsing it out there, or if I wouldn't recommend that, or if you're, have a rain barrel and you're collecting rainwater to rinse it out, that's fine. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to have, more than 90% of whatever the food in there is out of it, so that one, it can be processed by by an end user, and two, it's not contaminating something else. We get lots of jars of peanut butter and ketchup and mayonnaise and mustard and all sorts of things that have never been rinsed out. And again, it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to have most of the material out. You can leave the lid on because that helps. If you leave the mayonnaise lid on, that's perfectly fine. That can be recycled as well. Again, items not accepted. We get a lot of plastic forks and cups and paper cups and things like that because folks think they're paper. Paper towels, those sorts of things. Food, I think, has been well documented that it should not be in single-stream recycling containers. And again, going back to the pizza box there. This is some of the environmental benefits of what happens when things that are recycled and are recycled correctly and recycled properly. This is what it leads to. It leads to a lot of greenhouse gas emission reductions, which is certainly a very good thing. And again, I think the environmental benefits of recycling have been well documented. Simple messaging. Again, this is similar to what Zach was talking about, that the city is trying to do too, is to keep it as simple as possible. Recycle empty bottles, cans, paper, cardboard. Simple enough. Keep any foods and liquids out, just rinse them out in the retention pond, wherever, just keep all of that out of recycling. If there's a little bit of Gatorade left in the bottom of the bottle, just dump it out. Keep loose plastic bags out of recycling as well. People think that they're doing us a favor by bagging their recyclables. Even if they put it in a paper bag, that's not advantageous. It has to be loose, because when we get that paper bag, we don't know what's in that paper bag. And we get a lot of things that otherwise might be valuable recyclables that are in large plastic garbage bags. We don't know if that garbage bag is filled with water bottles or needles. So guess where that bag goes? That bag immediately goes into the roll-off, and it's going to the Brevard County landfill. So please don't bag recyclables. Keep them loose in your containers. This is our national campaign, recycleofandrecycleright.com, which has a lot of information on there about what is and isn't recyclable, has a lot of information on there of common questions that are asked, and some mythbusters. Because one of the biggest myths is that just because it has that symbol, that recycling symbol on the bottom of it, everyone thinks that's recyclable. It's not true. That is called a Mobius. And manufacturers work very hard and spend a lot of money to get that Mobius on their packaging because it's sexy and it sells if they have that symbol on there. So they do work very hard to try to get that symbol on there. Just because it's on there, again, does not mean there's an end user for that product. Particularly with those little, like if you look at those little strawberry containers, most of those have the Mobius on there. But again, when you look at what happens in the processing, they end up falling apart. So they end up not being recycled at all. This is the State of Florida campaign, Rethink, Reset, Recycle. We and others in the industry worked with the state of Florida to try and address recycling contamination statewide. So if you see this messaging out of here, this is from the state of Florida and what the simplified messaging they're putting out there to try and address contamination again statewide. This talks about what we've done earlier, ways that you can recycle things that you may not necessarily want to go to the landfill, like plastic bags. Again, they go to Publix, Kohl's, Target, Walmart, any number of different retailers will accept them. Clothing, we get a lot of clothing that comes through our MRF. People want to recycle clothing at single stream. It does not work there. There we suggest that they donate it to Goodwill or Salvation Army or one of those types of organizations that can use it. And hoses, extension cords, rope, those types of things, They're not recyclable. There is no end user for that, and there's no manufacturer that can make a new product out of those. So those are types of things that belong in the regular trash. And with that, Zach or Stephanie and I are happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you. Yes.
I was just wondering, is there any, like a factory or someplace that recycles paper in the state of Florida? Is there
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Councilwoman Raymond's question was, is there a manufacturer that is a mill, for example, here in the state of Florida that recycles paper? I don't know the specific answer to that, but for some reason I'm thinking that there is. I do think we may have a couple of mills here locally, if not here, I mean here in the state of Florida. If not here in the Florida, they're definitely in the southeast. So there are mills that will accept those bales of paper. Yes?
You said the paper is running at -15, you're actually paying 15 a ton for it. But what do we pay to haul trash to the landfill?
Well, right now it varies. I mean, I think the county disposal rate right now for the haulers is something like $32 and change like that or something for us to dispose of those. So yes, this is something that anyone who is hauling to whatever municipal or privately owned landfill is paying for. So it's known in the industry as residue. Residue is anything that is basically garbage that is not recyclable. There is a charge to the processor, whether it's us or anyone else, to take it to either a municipal landfill or a privately owned landfill for that to be disposed of.
I guess my point of the question is, what I'm saying is it's still advantageous even to pay to recycle paper because it's still half the price of paper itself.
It's two different things. So yes, the answer to your question, yes, you should still continue to recycle paper. The market will eventually rebound. I mean, it will eventually come back. Yes, please continue to recycle paper. Don't throw it in your trash. You know, again, you know, all of these markets are cyclical. It will get to the point where there's going to be a greater demand for the product again. Does that answer your question? Okay, great. Yes, sir.
There was not much discussion about glass. There was lots of glass, but that's still okay.
I'm so glad you asked that question. Someone always asks me about glass, which is why I didn't touch on it here, so thank you. Glass is very interesting. Glass is a known contaminant because glass breaks. Glass shards get into the fibers of cardboard and paper and even sometimes into plastics, rendering that material now unusable. Once you get glass shards in cardboard, that end user can no longer use it, they can't process it, they can't do anything with it. Glass is, here in the state of Florida, not recyclable in the traditional sense. There is only one company here in the state of Florida, and that's in Sarasota, that actually takes recycled glass and turns it into new glass and other materials and things like that. Sarasota County provides all the glass that manufacturer needs. In order for glass to be recycled and sent to a facility anywhere else in the country, of course, it has to be transported. It's very expensive to do that. So in most areas in Florida and throughout the Southeast and other areas of the country, glass ends up here in Brevard. I can speak to where it happens. So glass may end up in the landfill. Now, fortunately, glass does not have the same properties as plastic, where glass does eventually turn into its sand derivative. That's why there's not much of a market here in Florida, because, of course, the derivative of glass is sand. Sand is cheap, sand is plentiful. It's much less expensive for the manufacturers to import raw materials to make glass from sand than it is to pulverize and process and do whatever else they need to do to process the glass and turn it into new glass. So here's what happens to glass here in Brevard County. We use it for two things. One of which is it goes to Seminole County to be used as part of their required daily cover for their landfill. There are environmental rules that we have to follow for landfills, and Seminole, all the counties have to do the same thing. They have to cover the landfill at the end of the working face at the end of every day. So they mix this glass in with the material that is used to cover the open face of the landfill. The second thing that it is used for here is used for road base mix. Now, we have to pay someone, a company, to come and take this glass away. So every time glass goes in, the processor, again, whether it's us or anyone else, has to pay someone to come and take this glass away for it to be used for these other purposes. So there is absolutely no value in glass right now. The reason, though, that municipalities across the state of Florida still continue to have this need to recycle glass is because several years ago, 2008 I believe it was, the Florida legislature put a goal in place of 75% diversion, 75% recycling rate by the year 2020. They put it in place for all counties, and municipalities, of course, were trying to follow suit as well. There is nothing that you're going to put into your single stream cart that weighs more than glass. That's why glass is accepted, because this 75% goal is a weight-based system. So because it is weight-based, that's when we said the trucks go across the scale, you could have, 5,000 bottles in there, and now we all get a benefit in terms of what the counties are required to report to the DEP, because it looks like we're recycling a lot because it's all weight-based. What many states are doing, Oregon is probably the one leading the charge for this, they are changing their goals to make it a quality-based program rather than a quantity or weight-based program. And as a result of that, they said, we want a 25% diversion rate, but we want 25% of the right materials. We want 25% of plastics. We want 25% of cardboard. We want 25% of cans. That's what they're looking at. Now, again, here in the industry, we have a lot of people that work in Tallahassee with our state legislature because sometime next year they're going to have to do something with that goal. So they're looking at that goal to say, okay, how can we modify this and modernize it? And Senator Constantine, who led the charge for this in the first place, has even said, this was a really good idea at the time. And he's right, and it really was. At least it opened the conversation and got the practice started that we would start single stream recycling. Knowing what we know now, of course, now we look at it and say, weight-based is not necessarily the way to go. Instead, it should be more quality versus quantity. So that was a very long answer about glass, but that's why glass is still accepted. Yes, Platt? Yes. You probably know the answer to the question you're going to ask me. Okay.
By the way, Dean and I work together in this industry. That was a great presentation. Glass, as you know, is a contaminant. Do you anticipate maybe one day the space goes more like glass, if it does become such a contaminant that it's just not a good product to recycle, to do away with at all? Is that something you may see? Because we're considering that in some markets with our owners.
I would say, Platt, you're in, Platt, again, Platt and I do the same thing. What we're up against is it's really up to, when I do this presentation, I always kind of preface this with saying that, when it comes to glass, I cannot tell you to not put glass in your single stream cart. I can tell you what glass does, but right now, all of our municipal contracts here in Brevard County still require that we accept glass. It still requires that we accept glass at our MRF. Now, as a company, what we've done, and I think you guys did too, Platt, and some others have done too, is we have the ability here in Florida, because it's not, commercial recycling is not mandatory. We've eliminated glass from our commercial customers that recycle. We no longer want glass. We want your cardboard, plastics, everything else. Please, no more glass. So we no longer accept glass. Some other companies have done the same. So as far as the MRF saying no more glass, I don't know that we're going to do that. We're going to really look to the municipalities to say, we can tell you what glass does. Rockledge was one that was actually looking at the possibility of removing glass. I don't know whether or not they're going to do that, but it's something that is an option on the table, that they're considering removing glass from their single stream program. I don't know if there's any municipality, there might be one or two in South Florida that may have done it, but for the MRF to say that, we can't do that. Instead, we look to our municipalities, who are our customers, and say, would you consider removing glass? Now, until that that, Florida legislature goal changes, I don't know that any municipality is really going to be in much of a position to do that, certainly not at the county level. Other places across the country, yes, depending on what those parameters are, that is something that we're doing. But for here in Florida, we're not there yet. Yes. I'll go to this gentleman, and I'll come back to you. Yes, sir.
I have 3 questions.
Okay.
First question, since we're not going to be recycling plastic bags, styrofoam in the single thingy
Yes.
term, or glass, or soiled cardboard, what will the volume be increasing in our landfills?
It will actually be the same, because right now those materials are not recyclable. They're known as residue. They're going into the roll-off or the dumpster that we have at the MRF, and they're going to the landfill anyway. And what is actually happening, and what will reverse that, is if we put more of the right materials into that cart, there'll be a lot less contamination. So we'll have less residue that is going to the landfill. So for example, foodstuffs now that are contaminating otherwise valuable recyclables, that will be reduced.
Understandable. So when you get the really good plastics and the really good metal and whatnot to be recycled, what are the energy costs with the cost of energy and oil now? What are the energy costs to make that into a new material? Does it make sense to make it into Trex or products like that? Or will that just make it too expensive compared to using wood?
Unfortunately, that's not a question that I would be able to answer. That would be really a question for the manufacturers. The question was, is it more expensive, if I'm understanding you correctly, sir, is it more expensive for manufacturers to try to use recyclable products versus raw materials to produce new products? It really depends on what is being manufactured. So I know that there's, obviously we look at some of the manufacturers like Alcoa, for example. I mean, they have a whole cost analysis that you can find on their website that tells you how much of their recyclable materials are used to make new products versus raw materials. So, that wouldn't be information that we would have specifically. It would be up to the manufacturer depending on what they're creating. But now Zach has a really good company that the company that he showed that tile earlier, that's a question that they may be able to answer.
And do they melt that plastic, and how do they melt that to make those tiles, those green tiles?
I mean, I can only speak to some of the, the processing that I've seen, that there's various types of, it's not an incineration process, but do you know, Zach, offhand, of what they utilize, what process they use?
As far as I understand it, this particular company uses an extruder where the plastic is taken, heated, and then extruded out into a mold where it can be turned into a material like this roof shingle back here. That's how I understand a lot of these companies reuse. I don't know what the emissions are offhand, but in terms of like energy intensity to recycle goods, plastic is one of the best, being it's so lightweight, and as she touched on, glass is actually one of the worst. So I think it is advantageous to try and still do that.
I have one last question, and I believe, sir, you work for another. But yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay. It's great. I'm glad we work together. It's great. I think that's great. So are the waste, not to use your brand, are the waste management companies talking to the packaging manufacturers? So you inform them to make like a strawberry container up there and other products that make it more recyclable. All right, I mean, I know there's a packaging.
Sure.
I know I'm in that biz. I know there's packaging associations, I know I'm sure there is trash company associations. And are you getting together to make items? Obviously, you have to make profits. We all get that. Profit is not a dirty word. Okay, but I think there needs to be some sort, there needs to be some sort of dialogue between waste companies and the packaging manufacturers, and if the Mobius sign is useless, even though we pay money for that, okay, what are we doing to make it worthwhile? Or are you?
Yes and yes. And it's really driven by, from the MRF perspective, from what we have the ability to sell. That is actually the manufacturers telling us what they want. They're the ones that are telling us, we don't want those plastic clamshell strawberry packages. They're the ones that have told us, this is not valuable. This is essentially worthless. It's probably, this is my guess, but it's probably less expensive for those manufacturers to create those types of clamshell type of plastics from raw materials than it is to try to recycle those. So the manufacturers of those products have told us, we don't want those clamshells if it's coming to us in pieces. We can't use it. We can't do anything with it. So, you know, from that perspective, that is driven by the manufacturers of these products. You know, what is the most cost-effective mechanism for them to manufacture these products? Now, I can tell you that there is a concerted effort among multiple type of associations and industry and organizations, because of the change that has happened over the past 18 months, that they're really taking a hard look now at what can we do to reduce some of the packaging. And that really comes from a grassroots effort. And that has been, you know, communicated to us, that the more that, you know, we, all of us as consumers, look to purchase reduced packaging and look to reduce our footprint of what we're purchasing for packaging, the manufacturers will follow suit to that. So, you know, from the industry perspective, there has been a lot of dialogue in that regard. Does that answer your question? I hope. Sort of, yeah. Yes. Certainly. Yes, sir.
Okay, I think I read in the Cape Canaveral newsletter that comes out weekly, not too long ago, that paper should be office paper. But you're saying it's still okay to use junk mail?
Sure.
I think you said magazines?
Absolutely. Magazines, junk mail, absolutely. Magazines, junk mail, envelopes. Thank you, Platt. Thank you. Junk mail, magazines, phone books, you know, any of those types of things, yes.
The other question, or other you can comment on, I've been told that the city of Deltona has stopped recycling altogether.
They did. They did.
They're avoiding the state guidance or whatever somehow?
Yes. I mean, it's real, and the state goal really applies mostly to counties. Now, of course, all of the municipalities feed into that as well. And I know our municipalities here report to Brevard County, you know, their recycling rates. So, you know, with regard to Deltona, they took from what I understand, they took a really long, hard look at it and said, look, at this point in time, the processing and you know, all of the back end components of trying to continue with single stream recycling in our community is not going to make it cost effective for our residents. So they made the tough decision. I mean, it is. I mean, other communities are looking at that. They're really trying to avoid that, but.
I just have one other, just a comment. I think Zach talked about aluminum cans. You mentioned aluminum cans. Back probably in the early 80s, I had an employee who was working on his master's degree out at Kennedy Space Center. And he came in my office one day, I think he was taking a statistics class. And he said, I need to share something with you. He said, just learn that if you take an aluminum can and recycle it, it'll come back as aluminum in 45 days. And I can still remember that. That's pretty quick turnaround.
That is.
I'm wondering what it is now. Do you have any idea how fast they can turn it aluminum?
I don't, but I'm sure with advances in technology, it's probably pretty good.
It has prompted me to quit drinking beer in glass bottles, go to aluminum.
We love that. Thank you. We love that. That's perfect.
And can I-
Certainly.
Just to speak to your point about aluminum cans, I recently read that Aquafina, who is the drinking water bottle company, is piloting a aluminum can program to maybe switch their operations from plastic bottles to aluminum. So I think everybody loves aluminum now.
Pepsi's initiating that.
Okay.
Okay, great. Great. Yes, ma'am.
I had, at my condo, we have two big recycle, bins, okay, side by side. Then we have a dumpster kind of in the same area and another dumpster in another area. I mean, I almost put dumpster
Well, that would be,
more obvious.
sure, we're not your hauler here, so that would be a conversation between the city and your hauler.
Ma'am, you can grab my business card and give me a call, and I will make sure that either new and improved signage is put on that, provided by the city, or that Waste Pro gets a better identifiable bin or just more signage out there, because they have their own signage as well. But ours is bigger. So, so if we could get to talking after this.
Yes, sir.
We also in our condo, we put up signs, 2 foot by 3 foot, big red lettering right over the cans, the bins.
Mm-hmm.
Do people read it?
Probably not. Probably not.
A lot of plastic coming in.
Yes.
One other question, I had heard some time back, aluminum cans, can they be flattened or should they stay in?
They should ideally stay intact, because what happens is when they're flattened, they become really small. And yep, they drop right down through some of the recycling lines and end up on the floor. Now, we'll try to put them back through to get them in the bales, but most of the time they just fall back through again. So when they're flattened, a lot of times they end up going to the landfill because they can't get into the bale. So yes, leave your cans intact. Yes, yes. Yes, sir.
I have wondered what would happen if, when we go to the restaurants, instead of, taking our take-home, half of our meal in a little styrofoam container, if we handed them our Tupperware and said, here, put it in this.
You know, that's a really interesting idea. That is a really interesting idea. I mean, you know, I'm not sure that they can do that for health purposes, but I mean, that certainly may be something that the Restaurant Association somewhere down the line could take a look at. I know a lot of them have started to eliminate some of the styrofoam packaging, and they've gone to some of the biodegradable paper, you know, or some other types of things. So, I mean, even though the paper is soiled and it ends up at the landfill, it eventually does, you know, biodegrade, unlike, you know, a plastic container or a styrofoam container.
I can speak to that too.
Sure.
The last I checked, we had 34 restaurants in this city. As part of my job as sustainability manager, I will now be going to all 34 of those restaurants to either try and get them in the litter quitter program, which encourages them to not use any of that type of stuff to begin with, or start consulting about the possibility of a ban of some type for these single-use plastics. So that's on my radar.
Okay. Sir, you had a question?
My biggest concern that brought me here remains the glass. Probably you don't want to hear anything about it because it's just not profitable.
No, that's okay.
But it seems to me that glass is going to have a terrific impact on the landfills. To minimize that, I think is wrong because it seems to me that there's just glass is such a huge part of recycling. And my first question is, you mentioned Sarasota. Isn't there a way that the city of Cape Canaveral can ship glass to Sarasota? It's only across the state.
I mean, I can speak to the perspective from the industry. Sarasota does not want anyone else's glass. They don't want from any counties. Sarasota County provides more than enough glass than they need. So they don't want any materials from anywhere here in Florida. So that one facility. I'm sorry?
So they recycle their own glass, is that what you're saying?
Yes, I mean, they do take some materials from Sarasota County, some of the glass, which provides them with all the material they need. And then the rest is whatever their manufacturing process is, utilizing probably a mix of recyclables and raw material. Well, they would need a company here that would manufacture the glass. So if, you know, if Stephanie's team can recruit a company here to Cape Canaveral that would manufacture, you know, glass here, then certainly, you know, I mean, but, you know, short of having a manufacturer, you know, move into any municipality here in Brevard County that, you know, finds it profitable to use recycled glass, you know, that remains to be seen.
So there are no other options on the glass.
Not here for Florida, not at this point. I mean, the only other option would be to transport it several states away, which is very costly. because of the weight of the material, and you know, none of the municipalities have entertained, you know, adding that cost in that would be passed on ultimately to the consumer.
Like we need to find a way to eliminate glass.
Well, the nice thing, again, fortunately with glass, is eventually it does, while it's in the landfill, eventually it does return to sand. So that is the nice thing about glass when it winds up in the landfill. It doesn't stay there for 150 years plus, you know, like some of the other materials may. You know, this eventually does return to its you know, original derivative.
Let's take one more question because we're past time.
Yes,
Not a question, it's just a suggestion for the class. Maybe if like you and Stephanie can work on like maybe repurposing like pasta jars or like just different jars, like instead of throwing it out, like repurpose it. Like do a craft or use it for something else or use it for food. Instead of throwing it away, you can like repurpose it and. Or reuse it. Yeah.
That's a,
Like make your, yeah, like make your own sauce and then put it in, or use noodles, right, and put it in a jar and like repurpose it instead of.
You'll never be able to keep up with all the glass you're bringing into your house.
Well, I mean,
Couple of jars here.
I always have like, there's glass jars in my fridge that are filled with sauce that I always try to reuse.
I have to agree with you. Somehow it gets colder, it seems, you know, when it's in the glass, but yes.
to speak to that point, I think it's a great idea for education purposes, certainly, to do that. On Monday, I will be conducting a recycling session with the camp we have here at Cape View. We're going to be turning toilet paper rolls into ninjas, where you paint them, and then... Yes, yes.
Nice.
So yeah, that's a good idea. But I hope everybody learned something today, and I hope you guys maybe now understand why we changed the recycling guide in our city to what it is. I think Dina's presentation was incredible, so thank you for coming again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I certainly appreciate, you know, you coming out here, putting yourself out here. You know, some people have certainly not liked what we've done, understandably. I totally understand why, but it is the reality of our times, and I think what we're doing is going to help with contamination and simplify our process so that we get more out of what we can recycle. Because single stream is quantity over quality, and we're trying to bring that quality up. So thank you. If you have any questions or anything like that, my business card is right there. Stephanie is right there. She has some cards too. You can always email me or call me. I like those business cards. Please take them. You can also, these are the last of our reusable water bottles. Feel free to take those as well. So yeah, that concludes Trash Talk 2.
And thank you all for coming, really. This is really what helps, is to have folks like you that really care and want to know why. And then once we can explain why, I think it answers a lot of questions. So thank you all very much for coming. And by the way, if you would like me to come to speak to any HOAs or condo associations, I'm happy to do that as well. So thank you, sir. Thank you. Appreciate you being here.
I'm not seeing very well. I've had eye surgery.
Oh, goodness.
I'm on the board at Costa del Sol. And